In times of absolute terror, the rules of war that regulate the conduct and prerequisites of the opposing forces are often forgotten. The violations of these principles can range from murdering prisoners and/or civilians to sexually assaulting, torturing, or experimenting on them. In today's list, we look at the influential figures, often historic, whose horrific crimes against humanity frequently resulted in their deaths. That is, if they didn't disappear or end their own life first. Though some of their names may be unfamiliar, their actions will forever resonate in history. Despite the millions of victims, we're actually omitting Stalin and Hitler today from the list because it's just kind of the obvious answers. Now, the following men and women are not to be glorified, looked up to, or admired. Therefore, this list appears in no particular order. I'm Mike with List 25, and here are the 25 most notorious war criminals and their crimes. 25. Heinrich Himmler. The mastermind behind the Holocaust, Heinrich Himmler is widely considered to be the worst mass murderer in history, aside from Stalin. If not for this man, the Holocaust might not have ever occurred. He attempted to create a master race. I believe they all should have more or less strong Nordic characteristics. His Aryan race. However, in making rash military decisions rather than allowing his generals to make them, Hitler's racial purity plans were thwarted by his vanity, ending the war prematurely. Himmler was apprehended after the war. He attempted, unsuccessfully, to negotiate with the West, and was genuinely shocked when he was treated as a criminal upon his capture instead. For his final cowardly act, Himmler took his own life by swallowing a cyanide capsule. 24. Wojciech Tuka. When Józef Tiso became president of the First Slovak Republic in October 1939, he immediately appointed Wojciech Tuka as prime minister. Tuka, a lawyer, writer, and fascist politician, rose to prominence early on by introducing comprehensive domestic anti-Semitic legislation. However, his favorite delight was supervising the wholesale deportation of Slovak Jews to concentration camps. Tuka's health deteriorated drastically as the years went by. After having a stroke late in the war, Tuka moved to Austria, where he was arrested and promptly transported back to Slovakia. Tuka would suffer 3 further strokes, resulting in partial paralysis during his trial under the post-war Czechoslovakian government. Despite suffering from a variety of serious medical conditions, Tuka was shown no mercy, and rightly so. On August 20th, 1946, the 66-year-old war criminal was wheeled to the gallows in his chair and died by hanging. 23. Taha Yassin Ramadan. In 2002, while the United States and Iraq were preparing for war, Iraqi Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan had an unusual idea. He suggested President George W. Bush and Saddam Hussein settle their disputes through a duel, and believed UN Secretary General Kofi Annan would be the perfect referee. Bush was not impressed and declined the kind offer. Ramadan was apprehended by American forces 2 years later and convicted of crimes against humanity for his role in defending a Muslim uprising in southern Iraq after the Gulf War and his involvement in the murder of tens of thousands of Kurds in 1988. He was subsequently condemned to life in prison in November 2006, but the prosecutor considered the penalty too lenient. Days later, the appellate chamber directed the trial chamber to re-sentence Ramadan, leading to his hanging on March 20th, 2007. 22. William Joyce. Lord Haha, William Joyce, was an American-born fascist living in Germany in 1939 when he became one of the most famous broadcasters of World War II. His talent for public speaking gained the interest of Josef Goebbels, who hired Joyce for his own radio show to have a foreign fascist evangelize Nazi propaganda to Allied countries. By 1940, Joyce had 6 million regular listeners, and an additional 18 million occasional listeners tuning into his broadcast to foster distrust in the British people toward their government. By the spring of 1940, Joyce's rhetoric had become progressively dire, threatening Britain with invasion while urging Britain to surrender. Lord Ha-Ha's broadcasting career ended in May 1945 when he was apprehended by British forces and taken to England to stand trial. He was found guilty of high treason and hanged on January 3, 1945 in Wandsworth Prison, making him the last person executed in the UK for high treason. 21. Bosco Ntaganda. Bosco Ntaganda is one of the most dangerous men that has ever lived. During his 20-year tenure as a rebel soldier, he led a massive campaign of sexual assault, widespread murder, and horrific slaughter that destroyed entire villages and massacred their residents. He also used child soldiers to do his bidding, but would keep them drugged up to ensure their complacency. He lived openly near the Rwandan border for over a decade, evading international warrants for his arrest and all attempts to capture him. Then, in March 2019, he appeared to have had enough. This notorious war criminal, gangster, and untouchable mass killer strolled into the US Embassy and kindly requested that he be arrested and sent to the ICC, the International Criminal Court. What made him do it? Nobody knows for sure. All we do know is that his 30-year jail sentence is too short and will never make up for the atrocities he committed. 20. Carmen Mori. Carmen Mori was born in Switzerland and migrated to Berlin in 1933, where she became a Gestapo agent. Mori was captured in France in 1940 after a botched assassination attempt on a newspaper editor. Mori was initially sentenced to death, but was pardoned on the condition that she spy for the French. The Gestapo soon became suspicious and arrested her for being a double agent. She was transferred to Ravensbrück concentration camp, where she was chosen to be a Blockova, a prisoner in command of their block, and quickly embarked on a cruel life of torture and murder. Besides daily beatings and administering deadly injections, Mori's favorite pleasure was dousing prisoners with buckets of ice water in the lunatic room. She was liberated from Ravensbrück after the war, only to be rearrested by Allied authorities after they learned of her horrific crimes. Mori was found guilty of torture and murder and condemned to death, but she avoided the hangman by killing herself with a razor on April 9, 1947, just a week before her intended execution. 19. Felicien Kabuga. Kabuga is the monster behind the 1994 Rwandan genocide, in which government forces and Hutu militias butchered 500,000 people. The chairman and co-founder of the FDN, or Fonds de Défense Nationale, Kabuga employed his organization to supply machetes and other weapons to the government forces during their horrific murder spree. Being a generous man, he also contributed financially to Rwanda's radio station, which used the airwaves to incite violence and hatred toward the Tutsi population. Even after the genocide, Kabuga continued to support the violent Hutu militias and extended his support to the Congo-based Interahamwe militiamen. He was arrested in Paris in 2020 after 2 decades on the run. According to the UN, the Rwandan genocide claimed more than 800,000 lives, mostly Tutsis. If you haven't watched Hotel Rwanda, we highly recommend it. It provides a small picture of the terrible deeds that took place during the 100 Days of Terror. 18. Anwar Raslan. One of our time's most significant war crimes convictions took place in Germany in January 2022. Anwar Raslan, a former Syrian intelligence official, received a lifelong prison sentence for the atrocities he committed during the Syrian civil war. Funnily enough, Raslan thought he would find refuge in Germany after fleeing Syria, but justice was served due to a legal principle known as universal jurisdiction. Essentially, it allows for the prosecution of crimes in a country in which the crimes were not committed. The court heard accounts from survivors and witnesses of the hellish experiences at Raslan's detention center. They testified how prisoners were beaten with cables and metal pipes, crammed into crowded cells, sexually assaulted, tortured, and murdered. 17. Aribert Heim. Heim, also known as Dr. Death and the Butcher of Mauthausen, performed some rather nasty experiments on his concentration camp captives, including removing organs without anesthetic to determine how much pain his victims could bear. At Mauthausen, he was reported to have preferred injecting victims' hearts with gasoline, water, or poison, and when he got bored, he would time victims' deaths with a stopwatch. Heim was captured by the US military in 1946 and detained for only 2 years before being freed without charge. He went on to work as a physician in Germany until 1962, when rumors of an impending prosecution forced him to flee to South America. He reportedly died in Cairo in 1992 under an assumed identity, but many believe he continued to evade justice. Heim's body was never found, but his lawyer and son apparently provided evidence of his death. 16. Barzan Ibrahim Hassan al-Takriti. Barzan Ibrahim Hassan al-Takriti was Saddam Hussein's half-brother and the head of the secret police. Not a nice man, he participated in cruel and oppressive acts against the Barzani tribe in 1983 and used systemic methods of torture to suppress and remove ethnic and religious minorities. He was also notorious for his ferocity and violence in cleansing the Iraqi military of disloyal members. He was sentenced to death by gallows in the early morning hours of January 15, 2007. A serious miscalculation by the hangman led to a surreal scene when the trapdoor opened and separated Ibrahim's head from his body. As a result, the Maliki regime was shaken, with Sunni Arab followers saying that Ibrahim had been decapitated on purpose as an act of vengeance and an insult to the Sunni Muslim world. However, not everyone was upset with the mishandled hanging. According to one Iraqi staff member, many residents across the country believed the tragedy was God's punishment for Ibrahim's crimes and that he received what he so willingly handed out. 15. Alfred Krupp. Alfred Krupp was the child of steel magnate Gustav Krupp. During World War II, Alfred oversaw the Krupp factory, which supplied the German troops with tanks, guns, and munitions. In 1943, he was named chief of the Mining and Armaments Department. Krupp was a callous slave driver who initiated the request to the SS for slave labor. He aggressively collaborated with the SS to obtain labor from Auschwitz. Approximately 100,000 slave workers from concentration camps worked at his factories, with approximately 70% dying due to poor working conditions and violent treatment by SS guards. Krupp was tried in an American court in 1948. He was condemned to 12 years in prison and stripped of his assets. However, High Commissioner John J. McCloy pardoned him and returned his possessions in 1951. In 1953, Alfred returned to the helm of the company, restoring it to its previous glory. He died in 1967, the last member of the Krupp family to lead the company. 14. Ratko Mladic. Ratko Mladic was the army chief of Bosnian Serb leader Radovan Karadzic and a key participant in what he called the ethnic cleansing of Croats and Muslims from the region. The fact is, he extinguished the lives of thousands of Bosnians. In 1995, he was charged with genocide by the UN's International Criminal Tribunal in The Hague, Netherlands. Mladic was a slippery fellow and managed to avoid capture and remained a fugitive for almost 16 years. In 2011, his luck finally ran out, and he was found hiding in one of his family's houses and arrested. He was sent to The Hague, where he received a life sentence for his involvement in the crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes committed during the Bosnian conflict. 13. Irma Greze. Irma Greze's name will forever be associated with evil, having been one of World War II's most vicious Nazi guards. Greze, dubbed the Hyena of Auschwitz, quickly rose to the level of senior SS supervisor, where she unloaded her lethal viciousness on prisoners. Greze had an especially sadistic penchant for hitting women on their breasts and would kick prisoners with her hobnailed jackboots and have her dog mercilessly maul the sick and defenseless. She deliberately chose the beautiful female inmates for the gas chamber out of jealousy and spite. She even went so far as to sexually assault countless prisoners and kept 3 human skin lampshades as her personal trophies. Greze was apprehended by the British in the spring of 1945 and charged with several war crimes, all of which she denied. She was found guilty and sentenced to death based on the testimonies of her surviving victims and witnesses. She was the youngest woman ever to be hanged under British law on December 13, 1945. She was 22. 12. Slobodan Milosevic. Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic was the first incumbent head of state to be charged with war crimes in 1999. He would not stand trial in The Hague until 2002, long after his regime had ended. Milosevic was involved in some of Europe's worst atrocities since World War II. The horrors had occurred during conflicts in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Croatia, and there was so much evidence to be presented that it took the prosecution 2 years just to make its case in court. Lawyers contended that Milosevic was responsible for the sweeping ethnic cleansing of non-Serbs and brutal mass murders. This included the tragic Srebrenica massacre in July 1995, in which Bosnian Serb forces massacred over 8,000 Bosnian Muslims. Milosevic, a lawyer, argued his own case. He branded the proceedings a farce and stated that he should be, quote, credited for peace, not war. Unfortunately, the epic courtroom spectacle did not culminate in the delivery of justice. Milosevic was found dead in his cell in 2006, just months before his verdict was due. His long-running heart condition had finally caught up with him. 11. Joseph Kony. Evil takes on so many forms, and Joseph Kony's actions can only be described as truly appalling. In 1987, Kony established the LRA rebel group in northern Uganda. Following their expulsion from Uganda by the Ugandan military, LRA fighters sought refuge in neighboring politically unstable regions, including southern Sudan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and the Central African Republic, adopting the name Tongo Tongo. Their notoriety stemmed from the abduction of children, who were forcibly recruited into their armed activities. Additionally, the group subjected girls to sexual slavery and abuse. According to UN data, the LRA is directly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 people in Central Africa. They have also kidnapped between 60,000 and 100,000 children and displaced millions of Ugandans. In 2005, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Kony, forcing him into hiding. Former child soldiers have reported that he is still alive and concealed in Darfur. 10. Friedrich Flick. Friedrich Flick was a prominent German industrialist. By the 1930s, he had become the director of United Steel Works, Germany's largest steel company. A big supporter of the Nazi Party, he donated 7 million marks, and additionally supplied 10,000 marks a year to the SS. During World War II, Flick made a fortune by employing SS slave labor. As a result of his severe treatment, 80% of his 48,000 slaves died. That's 38,400 people. Flick was convicted in Nuremberg before an American court and sentenced to only 7 years. High Commissioner John J. McCloy wanted to revive German steel manufacturing and released him, just like Alfred Krupp in 1951. Flick was later reported to be Germany's wealthiest man and the world's 6th wealthiest. He died in 1972, never having paid a dime to the families of the slaves who died so that he might be filthy rich. 9. Radovan Karadzic. Radovan Karadzic, a former Bosnian Serb politician, was found guilty of war crimes, including crimes against humanity as well as genocide during the Bosnian War in 2016. From 1996 to 2008, while on the run, he disguised himself as a New Age expert in alternative healthcare, offering treatment for sexual disorders and ailments. He presented lectures in front of thousands of people while hiding in plain sight, and even started his own website. Despite seemingly evading arrest in Austria by posing as a Croatian healer selling ointments, the doctor was apprehended in Belgrade in 2008 when police established his true identity. He will remain in prison for the rest of his life. 8. Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann was the organizational genius behind the coordinated deportation of Jews from their home countries into designated ghettos and death camps. He's frequently referred to as the architect of the Holocaust, because he was a prodigy of Reinhard Heydrich, one of the worst figures in history. He learned Hebrew and studied everything Jewish in order to coerce Jews to abandon their captured lands and assets in favor of a better life in the ghettos. After the war, he was doing the same to Hungarian Jews, and if it hadn't been for Swedish diplomat Raoul Wallenberg's rescue efforts, the number of Holocaust victims would have been much higher. At the end of the war, he fled Germany via a rat line to South America, where he was later apprehended by the Mossad in Argentina. After a highly publicized trial, he was deported to Israel and killed by hanging in 1962. 7. Omar Hassan al-Bashir. Omar al-Bashir, a brigadier general who seized power in a military coup in 1989, ruled Sudan for 30 years. On April 11, 2019, Bashir was deposed in a military coup and arrested. He was convicted of corruption-related charges in that December and sentenced to 2 years in a reform center instead of prison due to his advanced age. Meanwhile, he was charged with inciting and complicity in the murders of demonstrators earlier in that year amid rallies against his leadership. He was also charged with 3 distinct and separate genocide charges and for his involvement in the 1989 coup that brought him to office. His trial began in July 2020 and he was sent to prison. Between 300,000 and 400,000 people died in the Darfur conflict in 2003, and over 4 million people were forced to flee their homes. 6. Paul Touvier. Paul Touvier, dubbed the Hangman of Lyon, was the only Frenchman to be charged with war crimes for his role in World War II. Faced with the prospect of death, Touvier fled and lived as a fugitive for many years, surviving by peddling bootleg chocolate to confectionery stores until the statute of limitations on his terrible crimes expired and France's President Georges Pompidou pardoned him. However, after being discovered collecting stolen Jewish property that he had claimed as his own, he was again charged with crimes against humanity in 1971. Following information that he was being protected at a priory, French Colonel Jean-Louis Recaudon and his squad wiretapped Catholic groups and sympathizers. He was discovered hiding in a monastery dressed as a priest in 1989. Touvier was convicted for his involvement in crimes against humanity on April 20, 1994 in Versailles, France, for his role in the Holocaust. He died in prison in 1996 at the age of 81. 5. Ali Hassan al-Majid. Ali Hassan al-Majid, also known as Chemical Ali, shared similarities with Heinrich Himmler. He frequently ordered lethal gas attacks on hundreds of thousands of innocent people and showed no remorse for the resulting deaths. Serving as a military commander under Saddam Hussein, who was also his cousin, he surpassed the Iraqi dictator in cruelty and brutality. After the invasion of Iraq, U.S. soldiers arrested him, leading to his 2006 trial in Baghdad for crimes against humanity and genocide. Al-Majid received a death sentence by hanging upon conviction. Subsequently, he faced additional death sentences, including one for the horrifying gas attack on the Kurdish city of Halabja, which claimed the lives of nearly 5,000 people. The details of the suffering endured by his victims are too distressing to describe, but witnesses vividly recounted the graphic horrors, including entire families perishing in the streets. Chemical Ali met his end by hanging in January 2010. 4. Charles Taylor. The former Liberian president Charles Taylor was named one of the world's worst war criminals for his role in the Sierra Leone Civil War. Taylor exploited Liberia's tribal differences and presided over a gruesomely brutal civil war that lasted 7 years and killed up to 200,000 civilians. Many died as a result of Taylor's army of child soldiers. Terror, sexual assault, and murder were among the charges leveled against him. He fled to Nigeria after being indicted by the Special Court for Sierra Leone. Taylor was placed on Interpol's most wanted list after evading capture for 3 years, and the U.S. Congress even enacted a measure providing a $2 million reward for his capture and arrest. Finally, in 2006, Nigeria announced arrangements to turn him over to the Liberian government. Authorities apprehended him as he tried to travel across the border from Nigeria in a Range Rover with Nigerian diplomatic plates loaded with enormous sums of cash and heroin. He is currently serving his 50-year sentence in prison. 3. Kurt Blome. Kurt Blome was a scientist who oversaw and participated in experiments against thousands of POWs as the Nazi Biological Warfare Program Director. To evaluate the efficiency of prospective vaccinations, he afflicted his victims with plague, anthrax, typhoid, and cholera. He also tested chemical aerosols' impact on captives at Auschwitz and other concentration camps. Blome also collaborated directly with Japanese scientists in Unit 731 on chemical and biological warfare research. Following World War II, Blome was recruited by the Americans to help with their biological and chemical warfare program. He was arrested by the U.S. Army in May 1945 and accused but acquitted in Nuremberg due to U.S. machinations under Operation Paperclip. He stayed in West Germany, where he was employed by the U.S. and died of natural causes in 1969. 2. Josef Mengele. Mengele rose to prominence as one of the SS physicians who oversaw the selection of arriving transports of prisoners, selecting who would be executed and who would be forced laborers. Mengele was dubbed the Angel of Death for carrying out gruesome human experiments on camp inmates. His crimes were incredibly evil, and there were so many. When it was discovered that one of the hospital blocks was infected with lice, Mengele gassed all 750 women assigned to it. He used his time at Auschwitz to further his studies into heredity, conducting human experiments on prisoners. He was especially fascinated by identical twins. His experiments included attempting to change their eye color by injecting chemicals into their eyes, numerous limb amputations, and other cruel surgeries. He survived the war and escaped to South America, where he evaded capture for the remainder of his life, despite being wanted as a Nazi war criminal. 1. Saddam Hussein. Everyone alive today recognizes the name Saddam Hussein, even if we aren't familiar with the atrocities his rule brought about in Iraq. Saddam's name means "he who confronts," and that was what the man did. Saddam's career had many ups and downs, and he was exiled, arrested, and jailed before eventually making it to the top. First as vice president in 1968, and finally becoming president in July 1979. He ruled Iraq with an iron fist, and, like any true dictator, relied on fear and terror to preserve power. He didn't believe in second chances. Hussein's monstrous regime killed at least 250,000 Iraqis and hundreds of thousands more in Kuwait, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Saddam brought about his own demise when in 1990 he ordered his Iraqi forces to invade Kuwait, triggering the Persian Gulf War. In March 2003, the US attacked Iraq. Saddam escaped Baghdad during the battle, but was discovered hiding in a tunnel near Tikrit. Saddam Hussein was convicted and sentenced to death for his crimes. He died by hanging on December 30th, 2006. So, I actually don't have one for this because this is just too horrific to warrant a, so what do you guys think kind of thing. So just, I don't know. These are awful, awful people. We need to do better as humanity. This shouldn't keep happening. But alas, it does. So, I don't know. Let's do better. I'll see you guys next time.
Enjoying our lists? Be sure to click that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Share them with your friends and help us consistently conciliate curiosity. And if you want even more lists, check out these videos here or just head to our website at list25.com.